All right. So last time we started out with our programming your radio lesson on our getting started with amateur radio series, and it was going so well that we ran out of time. And so I figured I would just shift everything out a week and or a month, and we will continue the lesson this week. So we will go ahead and dive back in where we left off, which was maybe we will programming from the front panel. Okay, so I think we talked this slide through, but I'm going to go ahead and repeat it anyway because we had gotten up to this point. We talked about all the different settings on the radio. We talked about all of the options and all the little things like that. And we talked about where to find frequencies that you would want to program into your radio. And then we got to this point where we're just about to start programming the radio. So that's where I wanted to start it out this week. And the first thing that you want to do when you're programming your radio is you switch your radio into VFO mode. Now, we talked briefly about what VFO mode is. There's usually two modes on the radio. VFO mode is, VFO stands for variable frequency oscillator. And that's basically how you tell the radio what frequency you want to operate on. And that is the hardware, if you will, inside the radio, or quite often software nowadays, inside the radio that tells it what frequencies to decode and how to do it. And then the memory mode is a way of taking those VFO settings and storing them in a memory location so that you can easily get back to them again if you want to do it again, right? So we're going to talk first about programming from the front panel. So the first step is to get your radio into VFO mode. Now, most radios will have a very simple way to do this. If you look at the traditional Baofeng, there is a button on here that says VFO/MR. If you look at the typical TYT, there isn't such a button, but there is a button that says VM, and that's your VFO memory button, right? And if you look at your typical Kenwood radio, there's a button that says, where did it go? There's a button that says VFO and a separate button that says MR, okay? I don't know how they do it on Yaesus. I don't have a Yaesu or an ICOM. What is it? VM. So there's a VM button on Yaesus as well. Okay. What about ICOMs? Anybody have an ICOM handheld? Nobody. Okay. I have no idea how they do it on ICOMs because I don't have it. You got?
You put the V and the M. Yeah. Yep.
So I don't have a Yaesu, so I'm not positive on that, but I would assume that would be when it says FM. I would assume that would be the VFO. That would make sense to me. Okay, so you put your radio into VFO mode, and then you're going to enter the frequency. And the frequency you're going to enter is typically the receive frequency. Remember, we talked about repeaters have two different frequencies. There's a frequency that the repeater transmits on, and that is your receive frequency on your handheld. And there's a frequency that the repeater receives on, which is the frequency that your handheld transmits on, right? Because the way that repeater works is when you're transmitting a signal, the repeater is immediately turning around and retransmitting it on the other frequency, okay? So you want to put in, we call it the RX frequency or the receive frequency, and then you put in the offset, which is the distance between that receive and transmit frequency, and you put in the direction, which is either positive or negative. Now, on 1.25 meter, 70 centimeter, I think 6 meter, and what's the other one, 4 meter, it's always negative. But on 2 meters, and I'm talking just about Utah here, other states may do this differently. Other coordination groups may do this differently. But in Utah, on 2 meters, sometimes it's positive sometimes it's negative, and it depends on where the frequency falls within the band. Okay. So what they've done is they've said, these ones that are here in the band are going to have a negative offset. These ones that are here in the band are going to have a positive offset. And that's just a setting that you need to know. So when you go and look up a frequency pair or a frequency on a list or something, it will say if it's a positive offset or a negative offset. On 2 meters, the offset is always 600 kiloseconds. On 70 centimeters, it's always 5 megahertz. And on 1¼ meters, it's always 1.6 megahertz. So you have to know that information. Now, some radios will have you put in the transmit frequency. They won't have you put in an offset. They'll have you put in the transmit frequency separately. Okay. In which case you have to do the math in your head. You have to say, oh, well, this repeater is at 22396 and I need to subtract 1.6 from that. So my transmit frequency is going to be 22336, right? 22 minus 1.6, 22236. Yeah. So you have to do that math in your head if your radio doesn't do it for you. But a lot of radios will just say, tell me what the offset is that you want, and it will automatically do that calculation for you. Okay. The other thing that you will need to know for a particular repeater is the tone, CTCSS, or DCS code if the repeater wants it. So I can't remember if we talked about tones, and so we think we talked about it last time, but I'll just run through it real fast this time. So there's what they call a subaudible tone, okay? And when you're setting for your repeater as tone, what you're going to do is set it up so that your radio will send this subaudible tone at some particular frequency. Now, for our repeater, for the Mark repeater, it's 103.5 hertz, okay? And so there's always a continuous tone being transmitted by your radio as long as you're holding the PTT down, and the repeater can hear that tone and use the presence or absence of that tone to decide if it's going to do something with your incoming signal. Okay. So you need to know that, and you need to set that. Now, sometimes you will be transmitting on a repeater, and if you followed right after somebody else who transmitted, even if you're not transmitting the tone, the repeater will keep listening to you and will keep retransmitting you. And you won't realize that you're not sending the tone until the next time you try to transmit and it doesn't work. So if you try to transmit and it doesn't work, nobody hears you. Tone is something to look at. All right, so what's the difference between tone and CTCSS? CTCSS is, and we went through this last time, continuous tone coded squelch system, right? Yeah, okay. So what that does is it's basically your radio is going to do the same thing. It's going to send the tone, but it's also going to listen for the tone coming back. So when you set it for tone, your radio is going to send the tone, but it doesn't care about receiving the tone. It's going to open the squelch anytime there's a signal. If you're on CTCSS, it's going to send the tone, and it's only going to open the squelch if it hears the tone coming back. Yeah. Correct. Yes. Baofeng is one of those. So on the Baofeng, you will see in the settings a T tone or T CTCSS and an R CTCSS. And that's basically, if you only set the T, that's the transmit, you're going to be transmitting that tone. If you set the R, you're going to be wanting to receive that tone. Most repeaters that require a tone do not send a tone when they talk. So keep that in mind. Some repeaters do, some repeaters don't. The other thing that you might encounter is a repeater setup where the repeater is using one tone on receive and a different tone on transmit. That's split tone, they call it. You can do that easily with your Baofeng because you can set those independently. But if you've got a Kenwood, you're out of luck because the Kenwood doesn't know how to do that. However, you just put your radio in tone mode and you don't worry about receiving a tone. You just use the transmitting. But that's something that you need to consider, or you can set up two separate frequencies, which is another pain. Okay. So how do I figure out how to program this into my radio? Remember, we talked about last time making sure that you had a manual for your radio. And we talked about sometimes the manuals are pretty bad. But your best bet is to get out the manual and use the manual to figure out how to do it for your particular radio. Now, some radios are pretty intuitive. And once you've been playing with a couple of different kinds of radios, quite often you can figure it out, right? But a lot of times, if it's a brand new radio to you, you'll have no idea how to do anything with it. Get the manual out, go through the manual. It will tell you how to do it. Okay.
It's like a new one.
I've only ever had one of those, so I don't have a snappy, witty response for that, Ragnar, but
You don't need to.
I don't need to be witty. Is that what you're saying? Well, you're fortunate there because I'm not. So if you are wanting to just do this for right now, you do that, you're ready to go. You can use your radio. You can key up, you can transmit, you can receive, you're good to go. But if this is a frequency that you think you might use again sometime in the future, like tomorrow, you can program these into a memory. So typically there will either be a button on the radio that says something like, on the Kenwood, it says M.in, which says insert it into a memory. Or on like the Baofeng and TYT, there will be a menu value where it says save, and you can hit that and save it to a frequency. So those are a couple of different options. I don't know how Yaesus do it. I don't know how ICOMs do it, but that's how you do it on the Kenwood and the Baofeng and the TYT. So, all right. So let's do some demoing. Let's see, we got a couple of Dans on the Zoom. Well, one of them is sitting right here. Gee, Dan. Got Dave here. So, hi, Dave. How you doing? I'm going to turn my camera on if I can remember how to do that. And I'm going to stop the screen share for a minute. If I can remember how to do that. All right. And then I'm going to try to pin my video. And hopefully this goes into the recording effectively. But what I want to do is I want to go through that programming of VFO on the Kenwood. And I have here in my hand a Kenwood TH-D72, great little radio. I love this radio. But I'm going to walk through programming a frequency on this thing. So I'm going to turn the radio on. And I realize you can't see this on the screen, guys. So just kind of point your eyes up here and you'll see kind of what I'm doing, but I'll talk about it while I'm doing this. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do, and my glasses, I cannot see what's close to me. Even with my bifocals, sometimes I can't see it. I need to get new glasses. So if you see me throw my glasses up on my forehead like this, that's what's going on. I need to actually be able to see what I'm doing. Okay. So on this radio, it's Kenwood. So there's a VFO button and I can press VFO. And now if you can see, it will focus. It's not going to focus. Okay. It has changed this line to a numeric frequency. So it's currently at 145.050. So if I want to punch in a frequency by hand, I just hit the enter button. There's a button down here that says ENT on it. And I press that. And now this changes to all dashes. And then I can punch in numerically the frequency that I want. So if I put in, somebody give me a frequency.
147.16.
Okay, 147.16, and I'm going to hit 0 because it wants me to put in a 3-digit kilocycles part. So I hit that, and now it's on 147.16. Okay, so that's great. Now I have the frequency set, and if you'll notice, well, you probably can't see it here, but a little tiny plus has appeared up here on the screen. And what that's saying is that the radio thinks that this particular part of the 2-meter band should be using a positive offset by default. So it's going to do that for me because it loves me so much. And because Kenwood loves me, right? So it automatically switches that. Now, if for some crazy reason I want to change that, there's a button on here I can hit, which I'm not seeing right now, but where I can set that offset to be different. I can change it from plus to minus to no offset. Is it 7? Shift 7?
Maybe not on that one. but-
Maybe not on this one. I know there's a way to do it. I don't have the manual in front of me. If I had the manual, I could flip through the manual and figure it out, right? Always have your manual, folks.
I think it is. Okay.
It probably is. Well, so on this radio, it's F. So there's a function button. And if it is 7, no, F7 is voice alert. Let's see. It would be, it's F star actually, is the shift. So I'd hit F and then I'd hit the star key, and that allows me to change the shift. And now it's negative. It shows a little minus sign. If I hit it again, now there isn't one and it's not shifting at all. So that's for like a simplex frequency. And if I hit it again, it goes back to the plus. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to set my tone, right? So on this radio, there's a button labeled tone, and I can push that, and a little T icon will pop up here saying that now the radio is transmitting tones. If I hit it again, now it's changed to CT, saying that not only is it transmitting tones, but it's also wanting to receive them. If I hit it a third time, it switches to DCS, which is the digital coded disclosure. We didn't talk about that one today, but that's basically a digitally encoded number that says, if you're not receiving this digitally coded number, don't receive it. So it continuously sends this number numerically on a subaudible tone in the background. And then if I hit tone again, it goes to TC, which I have no idea what that means without looking at the manual. And if I hit it one more time, it goes away and I'm back to no tone. So since I want a tone for this frequency, I'll press it once and the little T will show up. Now I want to select my tone, right? So on the Kenwood, there's a tone select option. And again, if I hit the function key and wade through this, I can find it's F8 for tone select. Now it was 8 for tone. F8 is tone select. And if I hit that, now I can dial in the frequency, the tone frequency that I want. Right now it's set for 103.5, which I don't think is correct for that particular repeater. Is it 100? So as you scroll through these tones, you'll notice that the earliest one is 67, or the lowest one is 67, and the highest one is 254.1. But you can't pick like 67.1. That would be too close to 67 and the radio wouldn't be able to discriminate it. So the next one after 67 is 69.3, then 71.9, 74.4, and so on. But 100.0 happens to be one of them. So if we dial that in and then we hit the button again, now it's going to send on that frequency with a positive offset. So it's going to actually transmit 600 kilocycles higher and receive on this frequency. It's going to send that tone with every transmission. So now it's programmed and I can use this. Now, if I need to switch to another frequency, I can do the same process and dial in a new frequency and put in a new tone or whatever. If I want to save this one and use it later, then I want to hit this M in button over here. So that's F and then the C button. So if I hit F and then C, now it's showing a little tiny arrow and a flashing memory location number. I know this radio has, I don't know, several hundred memory slots, but it picks the next available one, which is 9 on this right now, because I don't have anything programmed in 9. So if I'm okay with it using 9, I can just hit the enter key on here and it will go in. If I want to change that, I can actually adjust that 9 to whatever memory location I want to put this in. And one thing that it will do is it will show me if I'm about to put it in a memory location that already has something in it, it'll have the little arrow be filled in. If it's a location that doesn't have something in it, the little arrow will be hollow. So that I know if I'm about to overwrite an existing memory or not, which is kind of cool. So I scrolled it up to channel 25, which has a little hollow arrow, so I know I don't have anything there right now. And then I hit the button, and now if I go back to MR mode and turn my channel selector to channel 25, there's that repeater that we just programmed in. Pretty slick. Okay, so that's how you do it on the Kenwood. Let's do it on the Baofeng. Maybe. Let's see, gotta remember how to turn on the Baofeng. Okay. So the Baofeng. Who remembers how to program a Baofeng? I don't think I've even hit this. Gotta get into VFO mode. So I'm in VFO mode. And I can just type it, right? 140, what was it? 140, 147.16. 0. Okay. And then I got to do menu, and I got to arrow through my menu until I find if I want to set the offset. Oh, I was going to do the offset first for a repeater. So I scroll through the memory until I find the offset. There's offset, and it's already set at 1.6, which is what I want. So that's good. I don't know how I set the direction.
Or you select and you just hit the down arrow and you get to direction.
We got direction. Oh, direction can be positive or negative. The offset, right. So I can set the offset to be a positive number or a negative number, depending on what I want. So in this case, it's a positive 1.6, which is not what I want for 147.16. So what I need to do is I need to change that to, that's not what I want to do. Gotta get back to that. This is memory. So I get to offset and I hit the menu button again. So now I can change it. Let's see. 0000600. Then I hit menu again to set it. Then to go to the tone, I'm going to arrow through my memory settings, my menu settings, until I get to, I could dial directly to it, right? So there's CTCSS, and then I hit menu again, and then I can change that, the frequency. So I could punch in 100. Oh, it went to it directly when I put the 1 in. And then I hit menu again to set it, and then I hit exit. Now the VFO is programmed, and if I had an antenna on here, I could transmit on it, and it would hit that repeater. So if I want to save that to a memory location, I'm going to hit the menu button again, and I'm going to find the option in the menu which says save, and I hit menu again, and then I switch this around until I find the channel I want to set it on. That's not quite what I want. Did not save.
So the channels that are available, flashing, the ones that are already filled, install.
Not save.
And Baofeng is only worth halfway.
Let's see. We gotta find it here.
So you have to put-
Oh, here we go. So it's mem for memory channel. So I don't know if you can see that on. Yeah, you can't really. It's not reading it. Oh well. So you hit M chip, and then you hit menu, and then you can dial using the arrows, the memory channel that you want. And if it says dash number, then that memory is already programmed. If it just has the number, then it's not programmed yet. So then you find the one you want, you hit the menu button again, and now it's programmed. So then if I exit and I switch back to MR mode, now it's on there on channel, on this case, 127. So that's how you do it on the Baofeng. Yikes. Okay, the TYT, I'm not going to dive into the whole TYT programming experience because it's very similar to the Baofeng. The process is similar. So after we're done, we can come back to it and do it if people want to see that.
I think I
Yes.
have a couple of old radios, a couple of, single band, one side band also, and handheld. Well, my handheld has 7 on the top of the frequency, but on the front of it has dipsticks or
Dip switches.
dip switches. Yeah. And I think there's 4 or 5, and you just program them up or down, and it will change the frequencies and give you whatever it is, 80 all 80. So you just change the dip switch. And it works really good on mobile too, but it's like you have to take the battery off.
Yeah.
But then you can switch it on or off. But it was a lot more useful when they didn't have as many repeaters when you told them that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. So the very first radio that I used was a loaner radio that I got from the guy who got me into amateur radio. And it was a Radio Shack HTX 202, the brick type radio. And it had 10 memory channels, but the one that he loaned me, the tone generator, the CTCSS generator, didn't work. It was broken. So the only repeater I could get on was the Farnsworth 6.2 repeater, which doesn't require a tone. So I did all of my initial operating with that radio with no tone on just the 6.2, but it was a lot of fun. Okay, so let's see. Let's move on to the next thing of a deal here. All right, so the other thing you can do is program via software. Now, doing this by hand is good to know how to do, okay? Because if you find yourself in a situation where you walk into a place and they say, we're going to use this repeater, and you're like, I don't have that repeater programmed into my radio. If you know how to do it from the panel, then you're good. You can get it programmed in. And it's not a bad idea to make yourself a little cheat sheet with the instructions on how to do that, laminate it, put it in your Go kit or in your bag or someplace where you can find it. It doesn't have to put it someplace you can't find it, but put it someplace you can find it. And then when you do need to do this, you will know how to do it, or you will have your handy dandy rescue card to be able to look at and figure out how to do it. So knowing how to program it from the front panel is important, and everybody should learn to do that with the radio that you use the most. And it doesn't hurt to learn how to do it with every radio that you have, right? So I highly recommend you figure out how to do that. Pull your manual out, walk through it, program some frequencies in. Now, if you're programming in 127 frequencies, you do not want to do that from the front panel. You can, but your fingertip will be very sore by the time you get done. So most of these radios have the ability to be programmed via software, and there's a few different options you can use for programming your radio with software. One, yes.
Want to emphasize the importance of programming. For me, anytime I buy a new radio, and I've said this a dozen times, I'll program all 500 frequencies in on that new radio, because now it's muscle memory. And so that's why I was able to go through
And tell me what to do on the bell thing. And see, because I don't hardly ever use my bow thing, I could not remember how to do it. Now, I probably could have figured it out by wading through the memories, and the options, but if I had it written down on a cheat sheet, I would have been able to do it right away. So as Dan says, he likes to go ahead and program his 500 frequencies. So, yeah, so it's Dan's thing is, once I've done it by hand 500 times, my hands know how to do it without me even thinking about it.
That's very important because I can go to my FTM 400, which is different from my FTM 100, which is different from my FT 60, which is different from my 65, which is different from my 4, which is different from my T by
Right.
T. And every single one of them, I literally put hundreds of frequencies in there. And so it doesn't matter. Any radio that is in here, I'll bet you I can do it myself.
I wouldn't be
And I do
surprised.
that because when I'm out in the field, I don't want to have to look for my manual, and I do have the manual with me, okay? But when you're doing MCOMs, you know, I mean, I told you this story before where I went to Twilla, doing an MCOMs event there in Twilla. I went into the EOC there, they had a ID 880 icon.
And nobody knew how to do anything with it.
Nobody knew
Yeah.
how to do it, except, oh, it's like 20 years ago.
Right.
You know, because I have one of those radios, and guess what? I programmed it 1,000 times, so I was able to get Twilla EOC on the air.
Dan raises a very good point about programming your radio manually. And that is, if you do that, you will develop that muscle memory and be able to program it on the fly whenever you need to without having to go look it up. And I agree that that's a great idea and a great thing to do. But I'm still going to talk about programming via software because I am not as dedicated as Dan, and I do not want to sit here and punch 500 frequencies into my radio every time I get a new radio. So there's a few. That's true. I'm not a general. I'm just a technician. So of course, as an appliance operator, all I care about is operating the appliance. I don't want to know how it works, right? Now, okay, so few different options for programming the software. Software from the radio manufacturer. RT Systems sells some fabulous software, which I do not own, but I know Dan has it. And it is really good. We'll talk about that in a minute. Or there's a package called Chirp. And there's actually, there's two packages called Chirp. There's Chirp and Chirp Next, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so you have three different options typically. So manufacturer software, every manufacturer and often every individual radio made by each manufacturer will have its own separate program. Okay, so for example, the MCP program that I can get from Kenwood for the D72 is not the same program that I use for the D74. It's still an MCP program, but it's a different MCP program for the D74. Okay, so that's every radio, even though they're both Kenwoods, it's not the same program. Okay. Does Baofeng sell or give away software for their radios? Yeah, right. Yeah. So I don't even think some, yeah, because there's like BTEC, I think they have their own, and then there's what, Radio Oddity, I think they make one that they ship with the radio. Okay, but it's still, the radio's still a Baofeng. So this software that you get from the manufacturer is most likely to support all the features of your radio. Okay. Some of this other software we're going to talk about might support some features of your radio. Other features of your radio it might not support. So you have to keep that in mind. Quite often, this software that you get from the manufacturer is not easy to use. It may not support common types of functionality. Like I've used some that does not allow you to copy and paste frequencies. And you're thinking to yourself, How stupid is that? Why should I not be able to copy and paste a block of frequencies from one place to another? They just didn't implement that in their program. Go figure.
Engaged within the program,
But not from an outside source. Yeah. Import and export is another thing. It's great. Oh, great. I can export my frequencies from program X into a CSV file. And then program Y doesn't know how to import from a CSV file. So I can't do anything with that. Or I can build all my frequencies in a spreadsheet and then I can copy and paste them. Nope, can't do that with radio food, right? You know, it just doesn't do that. Doesn't support that. Quite often, this manufacturer software only runs on Windows, and sometimes it only runs on an older version of Windows than what you're using. So that is something to consider.
and sometimes it installs in Chinese.
Sometimes it installs in Chinese and you have to figure out how to switch it to English mode. Or you have to learn to read enough Chinese that you can drive the software. Okay. There may be additional programs that you can find that allow you to do other crazy things with your radio. For example, the Anytone 5888 that I have in my truck, I actually have a separate program that I can run that allows me to put that radio into essentially unrestricted transmit mode, which opens up the ranges in which I can transmit outside of the amateur bands. Of course, I would never do that because that would be against the regulations. This is being recorded. You don't want to say that out loud.
The license that might work.
Technically not legal. But yeah, so some radios may have the option to do that via software. Some radios, you may be able to hold a particular set of buttons down on the radio when you turn it on and cause it to come up in a different mode or cause it to do a hard reset into a different mode or something like that. Depends on the radio, right? You can find many interesting things by searching on the internet. If you search for a particular radio model and like how to break it or something like that, you know, you might find information that you may want at some point in your life, but I refuse to tell you to do that because, as I say, it is against the regulations. I will definitely not tell you to download that Anytone software and use it to switch your radio into wide mode so that you can access GMRS frequencies with it. I will not tell you to do that. So that in mind. I also will not show you how to do that while anybody's watching. So, okay.
There's a lot.
There are a lot of commercial radios.
But then you can also use it in the ham.
That is correct. And that is perfectly legal to take a commercial radio and use it on the ham bands if you are a licensed amateur radio operator. Going the other direction, taking a ham radio and using it on commercial frequencies is typically not legal because that radio is not type accepted for use on those frequencies or in those modes. But can you do it? A lot of times you can. Should you do it? That's up to you to decide.
All of the about the frequency and the power and stuff. You should be
You would think that, but the way the regulations are written for GMRS, for example, the radio must be type accepted for GMRS. And in order to be type accepted for GMRS, it must not allow you to direct enter frequencies. It must not allow you to do certain things that you can do with your amateur radio gear. Yes.
You know, they have to be only running on these certain frequencies.
Now,
you can break that.
Admittedly, the same physical radio may be sold with that notification or with that documentation as a GMRS radio and suitable programming from the manufacturer so that it can only operate the way that it's supposed to. But all you have to do is hold a particular set of key buttons down on that radio when you turn it on, and all of a sudden you can do whatever you want with it. So you can do things. Now, a lot of people will say, gee, what if it's an emergency? I can do whatever I want in an emergency, right? Yes and no, okay? The definition of an emergency, as far as the FCC is concerned, may not be as broad as what you think is the definition of an emergency. For example, I locked my keys in the car. Is that an emergency? It's an emergency for me, but it is not an emergency for the FCC. If there's a baby in the car, then suddenly it's an emergency. If a tornado is in your town, is that an emergency for you? Not necessarily. If the tornado is about to hit your house, yes, that's an emergency for you, okay? So you need to be aware of these things. And these are all things that we supposedly, as amateur radio operators, because we've had to take a test and prove that we know certain things in order to get our license, we're supposed to actually know the things that we said we knew, right? So, so keep that in mind. Is somebody going to hunt you down because you're using a GMRS frequency on your Anytone radio that's not type accepted for GMRS? Probably not. Dan's about to signal me with some pithy comment. Go ahead, Dan.
If I ever get stopped by the FCC and I'm transmitting on FRS frequencies on my FT60, all I'm going to say is one of the main aspects of ham radio is experimentation. I was experimenting.
That and $10,000 will get you your radios back. Yeah, so yeah, specifically FRS requirements require that your radio not have a removable antenna, nor be able to transmit above, I think it's 2 watts. And I don't think you can get a mobile radio, for example, that can go lower than 5 watts. So there's no way to do FRS with a mobile radio. That's just not allowed. It's against the rules entirely. GMRS does allow certain things. If you're doing FRS, you have to have an FRS radio. And yes, those particular channels are required to be FRS only. They used to be able to buy a radio that was FRS and GMRS capable. You can't do that anymore. The FCC has said no, that violates the purpose or the principle of the law. It may not violate the letter of the law, but it violates the principle of the law. And so any of the radios that you find in the store that say 40-mile range, blah, 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 those are going to be GMRS radios and they're going to require a license. They are not going to be FRS radios. If you buy an FRS radio, it will only be an FRS radio. It will not be able to operate on the GMRS frequency. So that is something to keep in mind. Some frequencies are shared between FRS and GMRS. Don't get me wrong. There is some overlap there. Yes. Handhelds too, right? Now, most handhelds can be turned to a low power mode, which would be considered legal on an FRS frequency. But because FRS doesn't allow you to have a removable antenna, and I don't think there's a ham radio out there that doesn't have a removable antenna, you can't use your ham radio gear as an FRS radio. You can use it. Technically, that should be illegal on FRS. Yeah, you definitely can't do that on FRS, right? FRS has power maximums that are much lower than GMRS and ham radio power, right? So yeah, I would be suspect about that, and it's quite possible that the manufacturer kind of sidestepped around that issue, and that if you actually go and look up the FCC certification for that radio, it's certified as a GMRS radio and not an FRS radio. FRS service and GMRS service are different radio services. So before you choose to do that, as a licensed amateur, you are basically saying, I know what I'm doing. And so before you do something, you should look up the rules and make sure that what you're doing is actually legal. Okay, this kind of went off on a tangent. Let's get back to programming. Ragnar has one more tangent. Go ahead.
I've been involved in operations. There's two instances where one was a very heavy fine and some time in jail. And the other one was a fine which wasn't paid, but he went to prison.
Yeah.
And that search and rescue stuff, you don't even want to get near that.
See, and a lot of radios will have, so Ragnar is pointing out that he knows of at least two instances where in one case, this was operating on search and rescue frequencies, and the guy had to pay a hefty fine, and another guy actually served prison time for doing that. Some radios will have what they call a Mars cap modification that you can make. And so Mars is a military adjacent service. Yeah, military affiliate. It's not a military thing, but it's in support of military service. And CAP was the Civil Air Patrol, and that they've actually, CAP has changed now. They use their own radios and their own frequency space and everything. So you don't, yeah, you don't use your amateur radio for CAP anymore. But it used to be okay to do that if you were a Civil Air Patrol member using it for that purpose, or if you were associated with Mars and using it for that purpose. It used to be okay to do
You
that.
also had to get airports.
Right. Ragnar points out that you had to have a license to operate on those frequencies as well, separate from your amateur license.
I think on each side of the amateur.
Yeah, I think the CAP frequencies were like in the 151
It was
somewhere.
143.9.
Yeah, so just above the amateur and just below the amateur frequencies were the CAP frequencies. So anyway, so manufacturer software will often let you access features of your radio that these other software options we're going to talk about do not allow. Okay, so RT Systems. RT Systems supports a lot of different radios, a lot of different manufacturers. It allows you to maintain one master frequency list. There's a file format that RT Systems is their internal file format. It requires RT Systems hardware. The cables to interface with your radio need to be purchased from RT Systems or it won't work. So for example, I have my handy dandy TYT cable that came with my TYT radio that also works on my Baofeng radio, but RT Systems will not like this cable because it's not an RT Systems cable. You also have to purchase each radio separately from RT Systems. So if I've got 4 separate radios here, I need to buy 4 separate radio packages from RT Systems. If they're the same radio, I don't, right? It's just different types of radios, right? So that's something to think about. Each radio typically is about 25 bucks. It is commercial software, so there is support. So if something doesn't work or doesn't work the way you expect it to, you can contact RT Systems and they will attempt to help you, theoretically. So we have another RT Systems user here and you contacted their support and utilize them. Yeah, I would expect them to be perfectly helpful because again, it is commercial software. They make money doing this, so they want to keep their customers happy, right? I wrote initially that it only runs on Windows. They do have a Macintosh version, but the Mac version doesn't support all of the same radios that the Windows version does. The Windows version supports every radio that RT Systems supports. The Mac version only supports a subset of radios. And I don't know all the details because I'm not an RT Systems user. So when we, Dan, did you bring your stuff? Were you able to demo? Okay, so Dan will show us RT Systems software in a bit. All right, the third option is Chirp. Chirp is free. Chirp supports a lot of different radios. The last time I looked, there were over 600 radios that were supported from a lot of different manufacturers, 81 different manufacturers when I looked. It may not support all of your radio features. For example, on the TYT TH350, this radio has 3 separate VFOs. The chirp driver for this only knows about 2 of them. So that used to cause problems. Most of those problems have been fixed, but you still can't do anything with the 3rd VFO with chirp. Okay. Now that doesn't change anything about programming the memories in the radio or anything like that. That all still works fine, but some features of the radio may not be supported or may be supported incorrectly. Now, chirp is open source software. What that means is if you break it, you get to keep both pieces. Okay. There's nobody going to help you. If you run into problems, there are other people who will help you, but nobody is being paid to help you. Let's put it that way. So there's nobody you can pick up the phone and call and yell at if it doesn't work. Okay. And again, you could do that, I suppose, but nobody's going to care. So that's something to consider. Also, because it's open source, if it doesn't happen to support your obscure radio and you know enough to do it, you can make it support your radio. Okay. So that's kind of a cool thing. There are people who love to make chirp support new radios, and all they say is send me your radio and I will figure out how to make it driver for chirp, and they'll do that. They may want to keep your radio after that point, so hopefully you've got 2 of them, but that's how TYT TH350 software support was added to chirp. Was somebody bought one and sent it to some guy and he said, oh, I can make this work, and he did. So that's something to think about. Chirp can import and export to and from other software formats. Some of them, not all of them. It does have the ability to load an RT Systems file. I don't know if it can write an RT Systems file, but I know it can read it. It can also import directly from radio reference and repeater book websites, which is kind of cool. It also has some canned collections that come with it that you can, for example, if you want to put all of the GMRS frequencies in your radio, it comes with a list of GMRS frequencies already set up, and you can just copy and paste that directly into your radio. It's maintained by volunteers, so sometimes support is a little iffy, but it is also fully cross-platform. It'll run on Windows, Mac, and Linux. So pretty much anything that Python runs on, it'll run on. Okay. All right. So demo time. Let me see how I can do this effectively. All right. I'm going to stop screen sharing. I'm going to share this screen. Let's see. No, I'm not going to do that. Hang on a second. I'm going to change this. Let me see. This away for a second. To actually stop. All right. Hang on. I'm going to end the slideshow for a minute. Okay. Then I'm going to change my display, because I do want you guys to be able to see this. So if I change this to I don't want to do that. I want to duplicate displays. Okay. So put that away for a minute. All right. So I have some software here. First thing I'm going to pull up is the TYT software. Okay. Go ahead and do this. And then it is not great. I will admit that. Let's see if I can share this screen. This is manufacturer software, right? Okay, so we're going to share. It came with the radio, yes. So define free, I guess is the question. Okay, so now I am sharing the screen here, so theoretically, people on the Zoom can see this. Okay, so this is the TYT software. Let me open. Here we go. This is my latest load file from April 1st. I don't think I made any changes, but say no. Okay, so here you can see I was able to pull in. Yeah, that doesn't really help either. I was able to pull in my file that I had, and you can see I've got a bunch of frequencies all in here. I had this saved as a file. Okay, so you can see all of these different frequencies. This is basically our standard load for Mark. I imported this from the standard load into the software. And then I added my own personal frequencies that I wanted. And then I have, you can see some of these are like grayed out. That's because I have no idea why that is. It's got them grayed out in the software for some reason. I don't know why. But so I added some frequencies in the first part of here that are frequencies that I tune to semi-frequently. But you can see the marked frequencies start here at 26. And then this is the regular standard load that starts at 41. And I wish I could see, I'm trying to stretch this wider so that it shows everything. Yeah, that didn't help. See, isn't that great? This is what you get when you work with manufacturer software, folks. You really don't know what you're going to get. Now, so there's the frequencies. It does also have optional features, and I can make changes here to certain settings of my radio that this software knows how to do. And I can also set the VFOs, which is, again, the 3 frequencies. I can set those manually through this software. But yeah, you can see what this does, right? It's not great. It's not terrible, but it's not great. So, I'm glad you asked. Okay, so remember when I talked about there actually being 2 versions of Chirp? So there's an old Chirp. Every time I start this thing, there's a new version available. It's just like WinLink, man. It's like I don't have to, so I'm not going to right now. But new features, new versions of Chirp are coming out daily, right? There's a new version, there's a new build every day of Chirp because again, it's open software, open source software. They have this set up so that as things get dropped into the repository, the new version gets built every day and gets published. So there's always a new version. Okay, so this is Chirp. Let's open, and I have in here somewhere the TYT Chirp file, and this is from April 2nd. Oh, like a whole day newer than the other one. And you can see here, this is Chirp's view of the same information. Now, Chirp is smart enough to allow me to stretch and close, make the windows bigger, smaller, things like that. It also has the ability to have comments in the comment field over here that don't get put on the radio, but they're in the file, so I can look at them and see things and know things about that. Very handy to have, very easy to work with. You'll see also, because this is an image file for the TYT, there's a settings tab here, and these are those same similar radio specific setting thingies, right? So are they all here? I don't know, maybe. I can also set some FM radio presets and test mode settings, which I am not going to muck with those because I don't know what that's going to do. But these are things that are in the radio image that Chirp will let me modify, right? Really, I try to avoid doing that because I don't trust it. I don't know what it's really going to do. I only use Chirp for frequencies. Okay. And that's my own personal preference. Now, let me show you a difference here. So we had Chirp running. This is the MCP, the Kenwood program for this radio. Okay. So you will see the difference here in a minute. All right, so this is MCP. Yep, okay. And again, I can load in, open. And of course, it opened to a place where I didn't want it to open to. Somewhere in here is my radio folder. All right, so this is the original. Apparently I didn't load. I'm going to show you something cool. Oh, this is how you get things out of the radio into Chirp or into MCP, for example. So I'm going to plug this cable in here. I'm going to plug this end into the radio. I'll show you how to do this with TYT also. Right. Plug that in. I'm going to turn the radio on. This one is a micro USB. Now, this one uses a mini USB. And these two use this funky cable that plugs into where the keyboard or where the speaker microphone plugs in. Okay, we'll look at that also in a minute. Okay, I'm actually going to read. So if I go in here and I go to one of these options is read data from the transceiver. So I click that and tell it read. Now it will, if it can find my radio. Now it's reading from the radio, and the radio says MCP mode program. So I can't do anything with the radio while it's doing this, but you can see it's slurping stuff out of the radio and getting it into the software. It's not taking it out, it's leaving it there. It's just getting a copy. Reading completed. And so, ta-da, here's my stuff, right? The frequency has been rounded to the nearest appropriate frequency. I don't know how many channels had a frequency that it thinks needed to be rounded. Apparently quite a bunch. Yeah, okay. So here in this MCP software, it does allow me to stretch it out so you can see the whole thing. And you can see the list of channels and everything here, and all of the extra magic options and things that I might want to fiddle with on the radio are available over here. For example, I can fiddle with the menu. I can fiddle with, basic settings, beacon, TX control, all the APRS stuff. I can control all of that through this software. Anything that the radio can do, this software, because it's Kenwood software, will know how to make the radio do it. Okay. So let's go back to Chirp and let's do the same thing. We're going to go to radio. We're going to download from radio. We're going to pick the COM port that the Kenwood is on. We're going to go to see all the different manufacturers. These are all the different radio manufacturers that Chirp knows. We're going to go to Kenwood. We're going to tell it this is the D74. We're going to go in clone mode, hit OK. And now, just like MP read from the radio, Chirp is going to read from the radio. And you see it gave me a new tab. This is another great thing about Chirp, right? Gave me a new tab. So here's all my Kenwood stuff. Here's all my TYT stuff. Look at that. I can switch back and forth. I could copy and paste from one radio to the other very easily. Very nice. But while it knows the memories and the banks, it doesn't know any of the other magic stuff. Chirp doesn't know how to do any of the magic TNC stuff, any of the APRS stuff. Doesn't know anything about any of that stuff. Doesn't care. Doesn't want to know about it. So if I want to fiddle with that stuff, I got to use MCP, right? I can run Chirp on my Mac. I can run Chirp on my Linux machine. I can run it on my Windows machine. It works the same. MCP, I can only run on Windows. Okay, so that's something else to consider. It's good for what it does. Okay. Now, if my radio is supported by Chirp, I probably will use Chirp to program it. But then I might go back to the manufacturer's software and pull that programming in and save that to a file. I can save as and say, this is my PHD74 fig as of 2024-04-04 and save it. Now I have that in a file. So if I need to go back to it, I can load that file, I can make changes, I can rewrite it to the radio, whatever I want to do there. Okay. So MCP is, yes, I want to exit. Let's go back to the TH350 software. I don't think I made any changes, so I'm going to say no. And then I have Chirp software still up and running here. So again, with Chirp, I can do things like open a stock config. Look, here's the US 60 meter channels. Oh, US California Railroad channels, US calling frequencies. We'll open that. So if I open that, I get a new tab that just has the calling frequencies for 6 meter, 2 meter, 220, and 70 centimeter. I can easily select these guys. Whoop, I don't want to select all of that. Select. I can select these, copy them, go over here, scroll down to an available memory location, like 225, paste them in. Well, that's because you're sitting way in the back, guys. You'll notice Ragnar is sitting up front. I don't know if he can read it or not, but he's sitting in front. So anyway, so I can do that, right? I can copy and paste from one radio to another. I can copy and paste from one of these stock configs into my radio very easily. I can then turn around and write this config back into the radio the same way that I read the config out of the radio. Pretty straightforward stuff. There is a difference in Chirp. You'll see some of these, I don't know if you can see them or not from the back of the room, but some of these say like CSV. So this US calling frequencies tab says CSV, whereas these ones that come from the radio say IMG for image. That's a difference, right? The image file has got more information about the specific radio. So I don't want to write a Kenwood image to the TYT radio, or that will brick it, right? It'll turn it into garbage. And in fact, the software won't let me do that, so it's okay. But I can create a CSV file or a comma separated value file that I can copy and paste into any radio that I want. So one of the things that Chirp tells you when you're working with it is the first thing you want to do before you do anything to your radio. We're going to do it right now. I'm going to grab my, this is my TYT cable, but I'm going to use it with my Baofeng because the Baofeng has the standard Kenwood speaker mic jacks, and this cable will work just fine. I don't have to have the Baofeng specific cable. That is correct. Okay, so let me talk about that for a second. So you see this cable labeled TYT, and it has a plug on this end that connects to the speaker and microphone ports on the radio. Now, it's not playing audio back and forth to the radio like a speaker and microphone would. It's sending serial data through these ports, right? And so this has a USB connector on this end, and inside this package here is a little chip that speaks USB on one side and speaks serial on the other side. Now, there are different chips, and one of these particular chips has been counterfeited by some people from a different country that starts with the letter C. And so quite often the cable that you get with your Baofeng will have one of these counterfeited chips in it. Yes, it's a Prolific chip. If you happen to have that particular cable that has a chip that is not a genuine part, but is a counterfeit part, Windows by default will hate you. It will not use it. It will say, I'm sorry, I don't see a cable there. Even though you're like, it's plugged in, why don't you see it? Because the onboard Windows driver doesn't recognize that counterfeit chip. Now, you have a couple of options. You can get an older version of the Prolific driver that doesn't check for the counterfeit chip and install that and tell Windows don't update it, and then you can still do things. That is easy to do on Windows 7 and somewhat easy to do on Windows 10. It is much less easy to do on Windows 11.
I just had to do that.
You did get yours to work.
Yeah, that's the same thing for my XP, Windows 7, and I went from 10 to 11. And
Yeah.
you have to use a 2007.
Yeah, so you've got to find an old driver that will work, or get yourself a cable that has CS Logic's chip in it, and it will work just fine.
Upgraded cable.
So there's a new one that is probably still a counterfeit chip, but it's a newer counterfeit chip that evades the counterfeit chip detection that the driver uses. Okay, so keep that in mind. One thing when you're programming with this type of a setup, plug the cable into your radio before you turn the radio on. Because the first thing the radio does when it turns on is it's going to say, something is plugged into my speaker microphone port. Does it look like a speaker and microphone, or does it look like a serial cable? If you plug it in after the radio is on, it will assume that it's a speaker and microphone and not a serial cable, and it will not work. So plug it into your radio before you turn the radio on. Okay. So if I do that, and then I go in here to radio, download from radio, and then I find my port here, and this says it's a Prolific. So it must be, TYT must use a Prolific that's valid, or maybe one of these brand new counterfeit ones that evades the counterfeit detection. And then I set this to, let's see, this radio is a real Baofeng. So I'm going to pick Baofeng. And then, yes, there are a jillion Baofeng radios. This is a UV5RX3 tri-band radio. So somewhere down here should be UV5RX3. And I don't see it on this list. So I'm actually going to pick a different vendor because I think I did actually buy this from Radio Oddity. And if I go to Radio Oddity, then here it is, UV5RX3. So even though the radio says Baofeng on it, it's not really a Baofeng. It's a Radio Oddity radio. Okay. I get this pop-up. It says, this is an experimental driver. Due to the fact the manufacturer continues to release new versions of the firmware with obscure and hard-to-track changes, this driver may not work with your device. Thus far, and to the best knowledge of the author, no UV5R radios have been harmed by using chirp. However, proceed at your own risk. Do you accept the risk? And I'm going to say, yes, I accept the risk. And then I will say, okay. And it says, turn the radio off, connect the cables, make sure the connector is firmly connected. That's another thing on these. Make sure you push that sucker in there because sometimes they don't seat all the way. Turn the radio on. It says volume may need to be set at 100%. I don't remember ever fiddling with that on this radio. Ensure the radio is tuned to a channel with no activity. Looks like we're okay there. Click OK to download the image from the device. Okay. And now you can see the little red light is flashing on the radio, and it is cloning from the radio. Slurpy, slurpy, slurpy. And I get a new tab that says Radio Oddity UV5RX3. And there's all my frequencies and stuff. Now this I have not updated to the new standard load. You can see it still says safe 1 through N on here instead of city 1 through N. And this obviously has not been updated. So if I wanted to update it, I can go to one of my other radios. Let's go to the Kenwood. And I can go here and say, let's see, that starts at 41 and goes to the Baofeng only goes to 128, I think. So I'm only gonna go, it looks like I only have to go to 125. So I'm gonna copy that. Control C. I'm gonna go back over here. I'm gonna go down to channel 41 and I'm gonna paste it because I'm gonna overwrite 85 existing memories. Is that okay? Yep. Boom. All my frequencies are there now. They all say city, whatever, and whatever they're supposed to say. Then I go back to radio, upload to radio. All of these settings are the same. You'll notice it doesn't let me change the vendor and model because, again, this is an image file. It's only for the specific radio that it's for. I could change the COM port if I needed to. I hit OK. Tells me the same thing. Turn the radio off, blah, blah, blah. Hit OK. And now it's, and you'll see I get a green light this time because it's writing to the radio. Yeah. Ooh. As it writes all of this data to the radio. Happy, happy, joy, joy. What happens if I interrupt this in the middle? Possibly bad things. Don't do that. Okay, it's finished. So now the radio will reset. And when it comes back up, I have EOC7 hospital frequencies. If I go up to channel 41, I can hit 41 and go direct there 041 and go directly there. And it says city 1 now instead of safe 1. So I just reprogrammed my radio with the new standard load. In like, how long did that take? 5 minutes. And my fingers are much happier. I didn't have to sit here and do a DAN and manually grind all of those in there. I could have after we learned how to do it, but I didn't have to do that. So Chirp, manufacturer software. Other option is RT Systems. I do want to save that one. And I'm going to save it right back in the same place. Okay. Dan, do you want to show RT Systems? I will stop sharing. Okay. So this is RT Systems. Take it away, Dan.
Okay.
Do you want to unmute?
Let me.
I will mute and you. Stand by, Dave. You are unmuted, but
Select the same as stereo mix. I am showing that I am using my, my built-in mic, so I don't know what to say.
okay, well, apparently the audio from Dan is not working. I'll just recap what he went through there. He showed the RT Systems with a couple of different radios, the FTM 100 and what was the other one? The KG 1000 GMRS radio, and how he was able to copy and paste from one manufacturer, one completely separate type of radio to another, very easily and simply. And also how the RT System software does know about special features of specific radios. For example, on the FTM 100, it has that SD card capability, and the RT System software knows about that and takes advantage of that. A lot of the things that that RT Systems does, Chirp will do, but when you buy RT System software, you are buying support, and you are buying the fact that somebody at RT Systems actually bought that radio or had that radio and tested with it and made sure that every feature of that radio works on the software. So,
Including the chipset they put on there.
including the chipset in the cable. So, and Dan says that when he buys a new radio, he actually says to himself, well, that radio costs X, but I'm going to pretend it costs X plus 50 so that I can cover the cost of buying the RT System software and associated cable to go with that radio. Again, remember RT Systems, you have to buy it for each radio, and you have to buy the cables from RT Systems. Now, just like that TYT cable works with the Baofeng, there's a Kenwood cable for RT Systems that probably works perfectly fine with Baofengs and TYTs and anything else that programs through that speaker mic port. You don't have to buy a separate TYT cable from the Baofeng cable, for example. Is that correct, Dan?
I am able to use my GMRS. I've only just started to do that using my RT System cable to a cable that I on a radio that I did not purchase RT System for, and use the manufacturer software, and it works.
So Dan was able to successfully use an RT Systems software with the manufacturer cable. So maybe they've relaxed the rules on that, because I know originally when RT Systems, when I was looking at it, you had to have the RT Systems cable for it to work.
Now, when you're doing RT System software, it looks for that driver.
It does have to be the RT Systems cable.
It's a generic cable.
But the manufacturer software could use the RT Systems cable. That's what you're saying. So the other way around. So
I don't think that happens all the time, because I did have some problems with it, but I finally got it to work. So I don't.
So your mileage may vary. Your mileage may vary on that, but if you have the RT Systems cable and the RT Systems software, you are guaranteed that that is going to work. And they will make sure that they send you an updated version of the software if something changes. For example, some radios actually have new versions of firmware come out periodically, and RT Systems takes that into account. They will actually support those new features that may be in new firmware.
Well,
So definitely-
every RT System cable is color coded to the manufacturer. So I can look at there and I can see which one is my Yaesu, which one is my Ocean, which one is, this, that, and the other thing.
So Dan says also that the RT System cables are color coded for specific radio manufacturers. So it's easy to visually identify which cable you want for a particular radio. Okay. Do you have anything else you want to demo, Dan?
That's good.
All right. I will let you stop sharing. I will turn back on. Just about done, folks. We'll turn this back to extend. It didn't stick. Back to extend. Keep changes. That away. I will share this screen again. I'll go back to here and zoom the slideshow. Okay, so I just had one more slide, which is our Q&A slide. Also, I want to point out, Dan did a fabulous presentation last year on using your HT, and he had 4 different HTs, and he showed how to do things with them, like how to program a radio frequency and how to store it in a memory on 4 different types of radios. One was a Baofeng, one was a Yaesu, one was the TYT. I can't remember what the 4th one was. There were 2 Yaesus. So that, I highly recommend you go and take a look at that presentation. He talks about how to do several things on each of these different radio types. And again, as you get more radios and you learn more things and you practice more things, you'll find yourself saying, oh, that's a radio like this. It's very similar to this other radio that I already know how to work, and you'll be able to figure it out, right? But is it a good idea to have the manual? It's a very good idea to have the manual. It's a very, very good idea to make yourself a little cheat sheet that includes the specific information you want. And in fact, somebody actually does that and they sell those cheat sheets, and I can't remember what they're called. They're called cheat sheets, but they have a name for them, a brand name. They're like, yeah, Clip Notes. I don't remember what it's called. Anyway, there's a guy out there who produces these cheat sheets for various radios. And you can, if you search for cheat sheet for radio, whatever, you'll probably come across it. Is it a good idea to buy his stuff? It's great. It's a great idea for him if you buy his stuff. You can certainly make your own. So don't feel like you have to buy somebody else's stuff. But yeah, that's what I've got. And I appreciate everybody's attention, and we will call it a wrap. Thanks, everybody. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the share, and I'm going to stop the recording.